Good morning, 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 my people, my people, my people, my people. St. Vincent the Grenadines, favorite and most hated son here. The Diaspora Machismo. I was going to use the StreamYard app to present this video this morning, but StreamYard is only allowing me to stream to friends only because I have not purchased their app. So my people, St. Vincent the Grenadines, favorite and most hated son here, Alan Palmer, the Diaspora Machismo. Today, we're going to examine one of Ralph Shitstein Gonsalves' master stroke, and we're going to see how stupid this man is. Right? Today, I plan to speak about 3 topics, but because I do not want to overwhelm you with information, and I don't want any part of this information to be lost, I will only deal with one aspect of what I intended to deal with today. Because in order to give you an understanding of what is happening, so that you can understand your rights in the future, right? I will take my time and I'll go into a little detail into dealing with this matter. So people, this is what I want you to do. If you're going to hang out with me for the next couple of minutes in this live video, on today, Friday, the 2nd of July, 2021, I would like you to share this video. Share it on your page, share it on a friend page, share it in a room, share it in a group, and when you share it, please tag someone in it. Right now, as I speak randomly, I am just inviting some people to come and look at this video. I don't know who has any interest in looking at this video, but I'm inviting them anyway. If they don't want to see the video, they can just go on their merry way. But I would be happy if you stay by and hear what I have to say. And if you think what I am saying is of any value, I want you to share the video when it is finished. Right? So people, I think I have invited enough people. Let me just invite a few more. Before I go into the matter, I'm not going to be taking people while I invite these people. If you share this video, let me know that you share it. Let me know where you're watching from, so I can give you a big up before I go into the actual video. Right? Let me know that you share, and let me know where you're watching from before I go in, so I can beg you up before I go into the actual video. Okay, my people, my people, my people, my people. S.V.G, my beautiful cousin, who is teacher by profession, is watching. If you're going to hang out with me for the next couple of minutes, I want to share this video. I advertise that I was going to speak about the medical records of Mr. John. I was going to speak about what is the difference between Kenneth John have shared. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you very much. What was the difference between a replacement prosecutor and an independent prosecutor, and how it would affect John's case? But I'm not, and I was going to speak about Juanita Hadley, the British lawyer. Thank you very much, Kenneth John. You are a trooper. Thank you very much. But today, I am only going to look at the illegalities that surrounding Mr. John's medical records. What have happened to it? And I'm going to put it into perspective. So it does not matter whether you are a teacher like Sylvia, or whether you push a cat on the streets. If you're watching this video, it's going to be so simple that the average person is going to understand how Mr. Lavon Williams has shared. Thank you, Lavon. New York City. Nice, my cousin. There's a family affair yesterday. Cousin Lavon and cousin Sylvia. I have to find out if Kenneth John is my cousin. Yes. So we are going to find out, so you could know what are your rights in similar situations. Because what I'm going to bring here to your attention, I will tell you this plainly, I will tell you this boldly. 90% of the police officers who are practicing policing in St. Vincent and Grenadines and in the diaspora is unaware of what I'm going to tell you here. I'm going to say about 75% of lawyers who are practicing do not know what I'm going to tell you here. So for some law professionals, this is going to be valid information, right? So I'm going to bring to you, I'm going to put into perspective several things that we all take for granted, right? Several things, you may have an idea about it, but I'm going to put it into perspective so that you can understand how Mr. John's rights is being violated, who violated Mr. John's right, and what they do that violated Mr. John's right, and what are the recourse the lawyer can take. Yes, love. Now, Ralph Shitston Gonsalves played a master stroke. He gets the hospital administrator, I can't remember her name, to break the law as it relates to Mr. Cornelius John in the Ashel Morgan saga, right? And what Ralph Shitston Gonsalves is considering a master stroke, it only shows how stupid the guy is and how dunce the fella is, right? Because his master stroke is an idiot play that not even a Mongol will play that kind of stroke. It shows that even though he has the volumes of the laws in his library, he does not understand the law and the application of the law, right? It shows that Sigella McDowell is another idiot, the Director of Public Prosecution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And it shows how far they will go to break the laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines when Ralph Shitston Gonsalves encouraged them to break such law. Now, first thing, the hospital administrator hand over Mr. Cornelius John's medical record to the Director of Public Prosecution. You may say, hi Natasha, nice to have you from Canada. You may say nothing is wrong with that. Yes, a lot of things is wrong with that. It is unlawful for her to do that. She has no authority to hand over Mr. John's record to the Director of Public Prosecution, even if the Director of Public Prosecution and her office is responsible for prosecuting Mr. John's case on behalf of Mr. John. Natasha D. Brown has shared, right? She has no authority. Let me show you what happens. In order, I would also say this, that the Director of Public Prosecution, who is a slave to the law in the capacity of their office, they must always follow the law when they are acting in their capacity as Chief Prosecuting Officer of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He has no authority to use his office or the instrument of his office to demand that the hospital administrator hand over Mr. John's record. Unless, of course, he has an expressed written document from Mr. John giving him permission to receive his medical records on behalf of Mr. John for the use in the prosecution of the case. So in other words, he have to present a written document to the hospital administrator in order for S.V.G McDonald to get Mr. John's medical record. If she does not have a written instrument that bears Mr. John's signature instructing her to hand over the records, she is acting unlawfully and it should not be handed over. Right? Or if the director of public prosecution, S.V.G McDonald, presented a court order instructing the hospital administrator to hand over that record, and in such an event, right, they have to inform Mr. John lawyer of the execution of a court order demanding the handing over of the document, because Mr. John lawyer may see it fit to appeal to the judge who issued the court order to revoke the court order, because it may not be legal, it may not be lawful. Right? So these are the cases where the handing over of Mr. John records is concerned. The director of the public prosecution, S.V.G McDonald, or the hospital administrator, none of them, the director of public prosecution, do not have the authority to demand that the hospital administrator hand over Mr. John's record. It's unlawful, and depend on how it is done, it may constitute a criminal act. When the hospital administrator hand over Mr. John records to the director of public prosecution, she also in turn violated Mr. John's rights to privacy. And that is a right that is afforded to Mr. John via the laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and through the Constitution of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He has a right to privacy. Right? So one of the things that Quebec is saying, that the doctor, let me rephrase that the medical records is saying that Mr. John was intoxicated. One thing, when he arrived at the hospital. Another thing that they're saying is that Mr. John declared to them that two male, came to his home and shot him. That is neither here nor there. Because I will tell you why it is not important. And it's not here or there. Right? All it is proof that either the doctor have been bought off, paid off, and is now lying through his teeth, and or the hospital administrator falsify the medical records of Mr. John and submit them as true. Anyway, right? The lawyer for Mr. John can have these records be barred from be presenting in the court, be stricken from the records. And I will show you how it is lawful for such to happen. One of the things that you have to remember, that the information that is shared between a doctor and a patient is privilege. It is private and confidential. And the doctor does not have the authority to make public anything that transpires between him and the patient without the express will of the patient. That is why when you have an injury and you go to the police and the police give you a medical report form, the medical report form is specific, because what it is doing, it is protecting the complainant, who is a victim, from having unnecessarily medical information disclosed to the public. Because once these documents are tendered on a case file, they become public records. So that is why the medical form is detailed in such a manner that only the necessary information is presented on the medical form by the doctor. Right? It is protecting the doctor from breaching the patient's privacy. And that is why it is so detailed. The doctor only have the rights to release information to the police and to the prosecution authorities, which the patient give him the authority to release. Normally, the only information that is released to the police and to the prosecution is the information as it relates to the injuries that were sustained. Nothing else. Everything else is confidential. And let me tell you something, how far this confidentiality goes. The doctor has an obligation to keep the patient's information, everything that transpired between them in the patient-doctor relationship, private and confidential. The nurses that are working in the hospital that would have access to the information, either overheard what was said between the doctor and the patient, or who have access to review the records in administering the treatment on the patient, has an obligation to keep such thing private and confidential. The hospital administrative staff, who is tasked on typing up the documents, has an obligation to Mr. John and to the hospital to keep all of his information private and confidential. Even if they have access to Mr. John records, it's in a serious violation to make any of the information that they were privileged to in the course of their duty public to any person outside, or to the press, to the police, or to anyone. The hospital as an institution has an obligation or a duty to Mr. John to ensure that they do all in his power to keep his medical records private, only releasing to the police and to the DPP office the information that is approved by Mr. John, the information that will provide the information the police need to properly investigate the matter and to prefer the right charges. So we see here the nurses, the doctors, the clerical workers, and the hospital in general has an obligation to Mr. John to ensure that his medical records remains private and confidential. They have a duty to ensure that Mr. John's record remain private and confidential, and no one has the authority to breach that duty to Mr. John as a patient of the hospital. It does not matter, right? And as I said earlier, no government agency, not the police, not the prosecution, not any investigating authority, has the right to access Mr. John's medical record in any of its capacity unless they have a document that was written and signed by Mr. Cornelius John. A document that was written and signed by a competent judge in that jurisdiction that authorized them to review the records and not his entire medical records, to review only that information as it has to be related to the prosecution of those people who injure him. So therefore, the scope of the access to his record must be limited. They just can't go into the man's record and search up anything they want to. The scope must be very limited only to that which is authorized by the court, who will be specific in their court order, or Mr. John, who should be specific in giving them access. So when you hear them talking about, before I go into that, when a person goes to the hospital with an injury, the doctor who is attending to them normally want to find out what caused the injury. Right? They will want to find out what caused the injury. And the main purpose that they want to find out what caused the injury is firstly to see the extent of the examination they will have to go through to ensure that they do not overlook anything and put Mr. John's life in danger. For example, if you go to the hospital with a laceration to your forehead and the doctor asks you how you get the wound, and you says that your wife bit out a piece of flesh from your forehead, right? Then you will not find, the doctor will not have any problem in that. He will not be looking for internal hemorrhaging, internal bleeding, or for concussion, because the fact that it was a bite wound that you came to the hospital with. If that same wound was on a different person, and when the doctor asks him, how did you get the wound? He say, a man pelt a bottle of beer that hit him in his head. Now the doctor knows that he have to do some more in-depth examination, because there's a possibility now that this person may have internal bleeding, and not only that, he may have a concussion. So therefore you might say he's ordering now a CAT scan or an X-ray to get a better idea of the extent of the injury. So that's the first reason why a doctor asks you, how did you sustain your injury? The second reason is if that you are a victim of a crime, you may be afraid to report it because you're afraid of the person who inflicted the criminal act upon you, or that person may have threatened you and tell you, if you report the matter, I will kill you. The doctor have an obligation to report any injury that come into the accident and emergency or the emergency room that is believed to be an injury that was resulted from a criminal act. They have an obligation to report it to the police. That's all the obligation is, to report that there is an injury that is suspected to be a criminal act, and the police should have an interest in this. Right? The doctor don't reveal anything else to the police, because if he have to tell the police the nature of the injury, he is now disclosing private and confidential information that is privileged information between the doctor and the client, the doctor and the patient. So you see what we have here. we see how this medical report is going outside the scope of which is required from a medical profession as it relates to a medical report of injury. And that is all is required from him. Right? So, when the doctor is given a medical report, all the doctor is required, the obligation of the doctor to the director of public prosecution is twofold. No more than twofold. The doctor has an obligation to fill out the medical report form that the police normally give to the person who sustains the injury. First obligation. And if there is not enough space on that, to put another appendix which will continue detailing the information as it relates to the examination, the findings, and the treatment of the injury. Nothing else. Right? After that, the other obligation he has to the director of public prosecution is to write a statement, a statement saying where he was, what date and time he was, where he was, who he saw, what was the nature of the injuries that he examined, the size of the laceration, the depth of the laceration, the length of the laceration, the width of the laceration, how many stitches he had to use to close the laceration, those kind of information. If there were broken bones or damaged nerve tissues, etc. He don't have to write a special report to the director of public prosecution. Anything other than the medical report form that is given to him by the police or by the patient and his statement, he has no other obligation. He is now going out the scope of his duty. If the director of public prosecution needs clarification on the statement that he wrote, they must find clarification when they are examining him as a witness, or when they are cross-examining him when they are re-examining him after the cross-examination. Right? So he has no other obligation to the director of public prosecution. You see, the doctor is not a witness for anyone. All he is there to do is give his findings and let the chips fall with him. Right? He is not Ashel's witness. He is not Mr. John's witness. He is just a professional who is revealing to the court his findings as it relates to someone who he examined in his capacity as a doctor. That's all he's there to do. Whether the state lose the case, whether the state win the case, as long as he fulfill his obligation by being truthful and honest in giving the information that as he remembered, or as is outlined in his notes, because more than likely he would work with his notes. That is his obligation, nothing else. Right? So we see here the director of public prosecution unlawfully obtained the medical records And she, being a practicing and trained lawyer, should have a better understanding of the laws of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and how they should be applied and executed, instead of going around and doing things all nilly-willy. You understand? They have to do better than this. If you are trained and you're acting in a professional capacity, you have an obligation to execute your duty with the level of professionalism that your training and experience afford you to do. So because the document was unlawfully obtained, Mr. John Lawyer, and because the document give excesses information that Mr. John did not authorize, and because the document appeared to have been a fraudulent document, because according to Mr. John's lawyer, Mr. John is not a drinker and he was not intoxicated. And according to Mr. John, when he expressed what happened to him, his story didn't change from when it happened. It didn't change at the hospital. And it didn't change when he spoke to the reporters. It didn't change when he spoke to the police. And it did not change when he discussed it with his lawyers. So therefore, the report that the hospital administrator hid away and is now coming to surface is a fabrication. So somebody needs to be charged with fraud and for tampering with a lawful document. These are serious criminal offenses. Right? Kay could get the court to suppress this document because first thing, it was unlawfully obtained. She don't need no other grounds for having this document suppressed. Secondly, the document went out of the scope of the information that it should have provided. Mr. John did not give them the authority to provide all of these information. And thirdly, the document is a fabrication, is a fraudulent document. So all of these are grounds to have this document suppressed. And in the disclosure, or as they call it here in California, in the discovery process, in the criminal discovery process, or the disclosure process, this document should not be given to Kareem's Nelson lawyer or Ashel Morgan's lawyer for the 3 reasons I just mentioned. You understand? So when Ralph Shitstein Gonsalves think he's playing a master stroke, it shows us how limited his understanding of the law are. It shows how limited his understanding of legal principles and the application of these legal principles are. And he has access to all of the volume. He has been practicing law. But he's a stupid guy. So all of the breaking of the laws, all of the destruction of the lawful instruments of government to secure a miscarriage of justice is not worth shit, not a stain that he provides. Right? So he could have the court and here the magistrate, whether it is Miss Brown or Ricky Bonnet, they have to suppress the information. They have no choice, because the Director of Public Prosecution, even though they would have gotten it in the long run, the method in which they used in obtaining this fraudulent document was unlawful, and therefore they shall not be allowed to use it in the case that is coming up. Right? People, this is just the simple fact. These are the laws. These are the principles on which the law must be executed and upheld in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Not based on someone's erroneous concept of what should be. Not based on shit stains, idiotic concept of what the law is. Not based on shit stains, foolish concept and his dishonest concept of how things should be done. This is not how the law ought to be administered. So therefore, that fraudulent medical records will never see the light of day. Dishonest Cornelius John, I call him dishonest because he's a dishonest man. I don't like him. He's going through hardship, and I'm happy that he's going through this hardship. But I want justice to be done. His lawyer must now apply to the doctor for a new medical record as it relates to Cornelius John injuries. K must outline the scope and the nature of the information that the doctor must put into this medical record. Be specific, because he does not have the authority to make public in the form of a police report anything he feel like. It is still Mr. John's medical information. Mr. John still has the power and the rights to determine which part of his information must be made public. Because once this information is submitted in a case file, the information that Mr. John allows becomes public property. I can go and get a copy of the case file. I can go and use a copy of this case file to do anything, to review, to do a video review, anything at all I want to. You understand? And his records, his medical records, will be therefore be public for me to use. So that is why it is important that the scope of the intrusion into Mr. John's medical records be limited only to the information as it relates to the injuries he sustained, the examination of those injuries, the extent of the injuries, and what a medical treatment the doctor administered to Mr. John in taking care of the injuries. They don't have the access to all of the man records. So here we see the DPP office violated Mr. John's rights when they obtained Mr. John's records from the hospital administrator without the express consent, the express written consent of Mr. John, without a court order. The DPP, who is the chief prosecution in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, is now breaking the law against the citizens of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Right? Secondly, the hospital administration violated Mr. John's rights when they hand over to the Director of Public Prosecution and their office Mr. John's records without the Director of Public Prosecution presenting to them a document prepared by Mr. John and signed by Mr. John, authorizing them to access his medical records as it relates to the injuries, or a court order giving them permission to hand over information as it relates to Mr. John's medical records as it relates to his injuries. The doctor who signed that document also violated Mr. John's rights, because in his capacity as a doctor and in his doctor-patient relationship, he had no right to put in the investigation information that he allegedly acquired in the process. His responsibility in preparing the medical records was to say when he saw Mr. John, where he saw Mr. John, what day he saw Mr. John, what time he saw Mr. John, and what was his injuries and what he did. What was his findings and what he did to help Mr. John in the capacity of treating his injuries. Nothing else. His opinion as to whether or not Mr. John was intoxicated is neither here or there. He's not supposed to give that. Whether in his investigation he asked Mr. John how he get the injury, and Mr. John say whether it's 5 or 10 people, it is not neither here and there. He only asks those questions for two purposes, and they're not supposed to be given as evidence, because he will be violating the client's, the doctor-patient relationship if he do such. Right, people? I hope I am clear. And it seems like Mr. John's medical report was tampered with. Therefore, someone needs to be charged with forgery. Because if you put added information to the doctor's signature that says Mr. John was intoxicated, or he claimed that he was injured by a certain amount of people, it is a forgery. And the person who is accused of adding or subtracting information from that document must be taken to court on an indictable charge for forgery, because eventually it's going to bore out when the doctor is examined if this was the report that he prepared in the initial state. Right? So people, these are the obligation of the doctor. Right? Here we see Ralph Shitstain Gonsalves again is manipulating the instruments of government to try to cause a miscarriage of justice in a similar manner he did when Michelle Andrews accused him of rape and sexual assault, when he confessed to have sexually assaulted Michelle Andrews. Here we see he is now abusing the instrument of justice in a similar manner, the instrument of government in a similar manner that he did in order to oppress Yogi Farrell, so that Yogi Farrell will be deemed as crazy. And when she speaks about his sexual exploit with her, people write her off as crazy. She don't know what she's talking about. Here we see he is using the instrument of government again, as he did in destroying Big's company. So we must ask the question, Why is Ralph Shitstain Gonsalves is so intent in destroying all of the instruments of government that are put in place for the effective and efficient running and the administration of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Why is Ralph Shitstain government so intent in destroying all of these facets of government? Why is he so intent and so determined to corrupt all of the government employees of St. Vincent and the Grenadines? People that is why reputable business, corporations and individuals will not invest in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because St. Vincent and the Grenadines is considered one of the most corrupt countries in the Caribbean. Because when you have a minister or a prime minister who is willing to corrupt the instrument of government and who is willing to corrupt the bureaucratic corps, not for the development of the country, but to appease his silly ideologies, to appease people who should be expending their time in the development of their country. Something is wrong. Something is wrong. What does Ashel Morgan has over Ralph Gonsalves? That he is able to manipulate the instruments of government to protect her, till where they're trying to throw Karim Nelson alone to the wolves. What does Ashel Morgan has over him? What is it he don't want the community to find out? Be careful, Ashel Morgan don't end up dead, you know, because Shitstain will do anything to hide a secret. Be careful you don't find Ashel Morgan somewhere strung out on drugs and people start calling her crackhead, you know, because he will get her addicted to drugs to discredit her if he can't protect her, to keep her the secret. Because a secret between more than one people is not a secret. People, I am not going into the Director of Public Prosecution and the Juanita case today. I'll do that on another time because I don't want the information to become clouded. I want the people who have looked at this video to sit down, listen to it, grasp the concept, understanding what are their rights in similar situation, understanding how Mr. John's rights was violated. When you understand that, you are better able to prevent your rights from being violated. So people, Natasha, Ralph abused the whole system. He's running St. Vincent like a communist country. And Tanya is saying because he don't care about S.V.G. You're right, he don't care about S.V.G. Neil Knight is saying, oh yes, it was. I think Neil is speaking about Mr. John records being tampered with. It was tampered with. All these people are bottom kissing. They have to do what Papa said. Stop calling this man Papa Neil. Call him Shitstain. Because when you are calling him Papa in a forum like this, you are validating him. He wants to be called Papa. So when you are calling him Papa, don't come here and call him Papa in my life. When you're calling him Papa, you're validating him. Call him Shitstain, call him PM, call him anything than the name that he wants to be called. You all have to stop validating this idiot by playing into his hand and calling him the name that he wants to be called. He is nobody Papas. He is nobody comrades. He is a shit stain. He's a shit stain that is soiling the country of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And it's time you idiots stop playing into his hands. You want to be against him, but you are supporting him by doing the same thing that he wants you to do. That is why you all will never get nowhere. Because you don't think. You don't think. Papa my ass. Don't come in this life and call him Papa. Don't come in this life and call him world boss. You call him out of his name. Call him shit stain. Call him prime minister. Don't call him the name that he have ordained for himself. Because only a fool will validate a criminal by calling him the name that he wants to be called. Idiots. People are sorry for getting upset. But it's time that my people come to their senses and stop behaving like fools. You think it is cute? Cha! Oh, they're too damn backwards. Too damn backwards. Huh? An oppressor is giving you a name to call him. And you're coming in a public forum and playing into his hands and calling him the name, the nasty oppressive name, by empowering him by calling that name. How stupid can you all be? Huh? How stupid can you all be? You all don't learn? Have you not learned anything for 20 years? How stupid can you all be? God! You got to be kidding. Cha! People, I thank the Most High for his knowledge, his understanding, and his wisdom. And I thank the Most High for giving me the opportunity to share the knowledge, the understanding, and the wisdom that he has bestowed upon me.